On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Hadi Radwan. He is the founder of Asteya. We're going to be talking about leadership and some of the core responsibilities, mainly about facilitation. Hadi's got a great background. He has a couple areas we're going to be talking about in terms of communication, thinking frameworks. I'm excited to have him on the show. Hadi, thanks for being on. Awesome, man. So let's do two things. Let's understand what your company does, and then as the founder, what are some of your responsibilities?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Hadi, as I mentioned. I'm the founder of Asteya, and we are a company that's looking to make income insurance more accessible to the US population. We believe that the most important asset today stands your income, and you need to protect it against any unforeseen circumstances. And this is where Asteya comes into play. We've been operational for the past 3 years, and we've raised around 15 million, and we want to deploy all of this capital to make our mission accessible, as I mentioned, to everyone.
Absolutely. And as the founder, I know you wear different hats. What are some of those hats that you end up wearing?
Well, it changed, right? When you start a company, you're more involved on the technical level. You build the product, you put the vision in place, you're trying to get the features of the product at least to a level of perfection that you can utilize it or use it or sell it. And then as this progresses, you start hiring people who are better than you and at doing this. They're more specialized, they're more organized. And then you stay more as a firefighter. So you want to make sure as the organization grows, there's many nodes, there's also more decision making happening, there's many problems as well that surface. You want to be the facilitator. You want to make sure you move the ball quickly. And if there's any stumbling block, you step in and you help eliminate that. You don't want to provide solutions because the people that you've hired are there to do that, but you want to facilitate if there's any conflict, any confusion, any deviation from the original vision. You want to be the one who steers the ship back to its course.
Absolutely. And I guess that's a good segue in terms of the topic of this podcast. We're talking about really facilitation, right? Key component of leadership is facilitation. Sometimes that does get lost in translation, and sometimes that is an issue. I guess let's kind of talk about things at the highest level first, right? So in your view as a leader, let's actually define what does facilitation mean, and let's start that as a jumping off point.
Yeah, so basically, the most important aspect of facilitation is communication. So if you want to put a synonym, a very indirect synonym of facilitation is communication. You want to be the person who's connecting different thought processes or different objectives. You want to steer them toward one common goal. That's how you're facilitating thing. And as I mentioned, the key thing is to be a very good communicator, because you need to bridge both thought process or gaps into one direction, so that you don't have people getting confused or getting lost or starting something that they shouldn't be starting, especially in a startup world where your limited resources is your cash. And you need to be on point, on time, and making sure you develop something that takes you to the next step. So if you're let's say a startup that's just an ideation phase, your goal is not to be $1 billion company tomorrow, right? Your goal is to get the product to your first 10 or 15 or 20 paying customer, so that they give you back feedback. And then based on that feedback, you move to the next step. So the facilitation plays a key role here in determining what's the best course for the next step, not the ultimate goal.
Absolutely. Yeah. And actually, you bring up a good point. I'd actually kind of even go further. I think this, startups obviously have limited budget and do have different constraints. And I'd say even people at big companies, they still have budgets, might be bigger budgets, but they still have the similar type of limitations. And I guess when you're talking about communication, that really is a great synonym. You're right. When you're thinking about that, a lot of times leadership is about thinking about communicating out the vision, making sure people are aware, understanding that. Obviously, you're doing a lot of things behind the scenes. When you're translating that vision and you're trying to make sure that it fits, I guess you have different audiences. How do you start adjusting that communication to each audience so that everyone has the right purview of that vision?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way I look at it is you have a pyramid. At the top of the pyramid, there's a vision. At the bottom of the pyramid, there's your tactics. Okay. So if you're talking to an audience who are at the tactical level, it's too far between the vision and the tactics that they connect the dots. So you have to move down in a very organized and structured manner. You have the vision, you have the mission, you have the strategy, you have tactics, and then beyond tactics, you can break it down into more like if you're a pro in the product where there's user stories, there's features, there's epics, etc. So the moment you understand the framework, you need to identify first who you're talking to and where they fit in the pyramid. And then you can link all of this together. So, for example, if I'm talking to a developer who's writing a code for a small feature in the product, if I mention to them, hey, we're going to be the leader in income insurance, our mission is to make income insurance accessible for everyone. And they're actually building a website. The link between both of these is a bit far away. So I need to break it down in a way to draw the storyline of how the vision is going to fit to what that person is doing. And then they understand how their work is impactful, even at the tactical level. So that's how I think about it. This is the vision the framework I use, which is a pyramid that links the vision all the way to the scope of work that someone is doing.
Absolutely. And I guess the next question is about still communication, getting people to understand the vision. Sometimes you get leaders that are very good at painting that picture. They can simplify communication, but the gap they have is actually taking communication back, because I think most leaders, obviously they need to bring that to the table. But that feedback loop, understanding the feedback from what they're putting out there, understanding, how they're helping, that's super important, because if you're not listening as intently as you're speaking, you're going to miss a big beat here.
You're absolutely spot on. And I think a lot of leaders who have a big ego, they don't have that two-doorway communication where you listen, you communicate, but you also take whatever is given to you and try to understand why it's given in that format, what's the gist behind it, and can I use it to become a better leader? So I've seen a lot of people who are one-way leaders. They're at the top, and primarily, if you want a leader, your title makes you a manager. But if you want to be a leader, you need to make sure that your people are giving you that title of a leader. You cannot proclaim you're a leader because you're a leader of someone, and that someone needs to acknowledge that you're a leader. So a lot of top executives, they have this variation. I'm a leader, but they're actually a manager. So it's important, as you said, Amir, it has to be a two-way communication. You need to listen, you need to collect that feedback, and you need to work on it. You need to give back as well a feedback. So if someone tells me, hey, Hadi, you're leading from a place of weakness, I wouldn't fire that person, right? I would go back and say, okay, let me understand your thought process. Let me understand why you think that. What have you seen that I have not seen? And then I get that feedback back and work on it, because eventually the only way a company can grow fast enough is to fail fast, but to learn fast, because you don't want to make all the mistakes in the world. Eventually, mistakes cost money. So if you can anticipate by listening to other people, that would help you as well grow. So that's how I would look at it. Every year, I would send out a survey for all of my employees in an anonymous format to give me feedback. Could be on my communication skills, on my leadership skills, on the vision, on what they've seen wrong in the company, and I can use that feedback to, one, become a better leader, and to understand what's my position in the company. Am I being respected because of my title, or am I being respected because of the way I communicate, I lead, I talk to the employees, etc. So I think this is very valuable to have a humility and empathy toward the people who are giving you feedback back.
Absolutely. And you said something interesting about failing fast, learning fast. I think that's one of the best ways you can approach things. It is a skill, and I think it's also challenging when you're a leader and your goal is to facilitate. You're trying to implement a strategy, a vision, goals, to be able to assimilate and take that information back and know which pieces are the items that are actually the core to what you're failing, because there's a lot of noise, a lot of false signals of failure, and your job is to also discern which one of those signals you need to process.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I can talk personally about how I've developed that skill. Early on in my career, especially in my university years, I had to work twice as hard as other people because I didn't have enough money. I had to work 2 jobs, and I wanted to make sure I get my fees paid by the university. And to do that, you need to be at top 5% of your cohort. So I learned early on that you need to find frameworks, you need to find shortcuts, and you need to test them very quickly, because you have a short period of time where you either fail or you succeed. And that's when you go out to school, you have a limited time to succeed. So this is where, I mean, we can talk about it later, how I've developed the love for frameworks and mental models, because they gave me these shortcuts to figure things out quickly, test them out, fail most of the time, but it's not a fatal failure. It's a failure where you can learn fast, you adjust, and then you have an advantage over other people. And if you do that in a short period of time, eventually you hear this motto where you don't need to work hard, you need to work smart. Well, for me, you have to work hard and smart. This is where you have a competitive advantage in life and in your business. I remember the famous basketball player, Kobe Bryant. He was explaining his training process, and he was saying, you know what, every basketball player starts training at 8 a.m., then they start, doing another training at 2, and then at 6. For him, he was waking up much earlier. So he was training at 4, and then at 6, and then at 8. So he was able to get 2 times the trainings versus 1 time from another basketball player. And that's what allowed him to be extremely, extremely competitive, but at the same time, very talented. It's not that he was born only with the gene. He actually works twice as hard, and he learned because he did a lot of mistake off the court, and then he did much better on the court. So I think it's critical that you learn this skill, and the only way to learn it is to practice it, not to be afraid from failure, rejections, what have you.
Absolutely. And I think you mentioned mental models, different frameworks. Obviously, as a leader, you have to remove yourself as the bottleneck. You can't facilitate by doing everything, and you do have people coming to you to solve problems that you may not have answers for. So I guess when you're looking at these mental models and knowing that as a leader you are going to be presented with situations you don't know how to address, how do you go about facilitating those problems? Because those are the ones that you also don't know 100% what the outcome is. So you have less control even than normal.
It's a good question because it involves both understanding the human behavior, understanding how these frameworks work, the patterns involved in them, and eventually a trust element. So I'll give an example just to highlight this. One of the things that I do to plan efficiently my time and sometimes the deliverables of the company is I rely on people I trust. So hiring is critical, But most of the time, I know that people, if you give them a deadline, they would fill that time and they might give you the end result within that deadline. Now, if you know Parkinson's law is like a mental framework that tells you, you know what, people will complete a task according to the time you give them. So if you give them 6 hours, they would complete the task in 6 hours, even though it might take them 2 hours. Very rare you'd see people who are probably nerdy or very efficient. They don't want to waste time, that they do instead of 6 hours, 2 hours. So knowing that when I'm sitting with one of the developers and they say, you know what, this task might take us 6 weeks, I would challenge them immediately. I would say, you know what, I think you're too talented just to take 6 weeks. You can do it in 4 weeks, right? If they push back, I'll try to understand why it's 6 weeks. How can they push it to 4 weeks? And then I would see if what they're saying is more reasonable, like the resources are overstretched, the budget is not there. I would know that 6 weeks makes sense. But most of the time they say, okay, yeah, we can do it in 4 weeks. So that's one way that you can actually deliver something with a result for an outcome you don't know about. Okay, so that's one framework I quite frankly use a lot. Another framework that also has personally helped me when I'm learning new things is, I don't know if you're familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect, where a lot of people overestimate their own competence when it comes to a new skill. So when you're learning, let's say you're learning how to sell an insurance policy, right? Someone comes in and say, hey, Amir, you know, this is the framework, follow it, pick the phone, follow the script. You start doing it and you see, oh, I've closed my first sale. I closed my second sale, right? Now you say, you know what, I'm born for this. No one does it better than me. And you figure out as you're doing these calls, rejections come later. Maybe you were lucky at the beginning. Maybe it was just, you know, you got the major stuff when it comes to selling, but it's always in the details. And you figure out over time that as you're building your skill set, as you're practicing, as you're failing, your real skill set starts to move up and then you become an expert. So knowing this framework, every time I approach something new, I keep my ego in check. I would say, okay, I'm learning to do let's say, I'm learning a new musical instrument. Probably it's going to take me some time to know how to do it. So leave your ego at home, make sure you practice, make sure you know that your competence doesn't go immediately from day one and you become an extremely adept and smart person. There's the framework I had read recently, which looks at the 2x2 matrix. It looks on one side, your conscious part of learning things, and then on the other side, your competence level. And at the first quadrant, where you're conscious that you don't know how to do it because you're incompetent yet, you started there. You start here, and then as you practice more, you start moving from one quadrant to another. You become consciously competent. You're aware that you're now becoming skill set, but you still need to think about it, still learn it. And then at the end of that, you become unconsciously competent. It's like, you know, you see a lot of musicians playing an instrument, they do it without thinking probably. It's inherent to them. But that takes tens of thousands of hours to do that. So again, knowing those frameworks, you do understand that the journey to learning something is not easy. It takes time. And that's the same when you're starting a company. You won't hit the jackpot from day one. It takes time. You need to learn the mistakes. You need to understand that there are other humans involved. You need to understand that customers are not always what they say they are. Suppliers the same. Your shareholders, funding, everything is difficult. You need to learn all of this so that your second startup becomes easier, become more unconscious, competent, what you can do and what you cannot do. You don't fail the same time because you've learned from that part. So it's much faster to grow from 0 to 1 million next time.
Absolutely. I like that. I think those are some very good like frameworks that you've relied on. I think the examples are great. And I think, going back to facilitation and people, coming to you with the problems that you don't necessarily have answers to, being able to rely on some of those core bedrock, comfort areas that you have gives you the base to be a good facilitator. Because I think the hardest thing to sometimes facilitation is knowing how to break down the problem so that someone else can take that smaller piece and work with it, because sometimes we see the whole problem and we just don't even know what to tackle. So I think actually some of those are very good. I think I'm a big believer in Parkinson's law. I feel that always is true. So I think this is a very interesting insight you provided.
Absolutely. I think one more thing to add on facilitation, which is key, is the culture of your organization, right? Because the way I see culture is what happens when you're not in the room? What are your employees doing? You need to shape that culture. If you don't shape it early on, then facilitation, you or someone else, will become disruptive. And I think it's critical that a lot of people listening to this podcast, if they have a company or they're starting a company, start there, build the right culture, and then the facilitation will be much easier because you'll have less problems. And even if you have problems, your team will solve them on their own. They wouldn't come back to you. And that goes back to my idea of being a firefighter. If there's no fires around, your job is easy. You're just waiting, making sure everything is running smoothly. If there's a lot of fires, then there's a root cause for that. And you don't want to be all over the place because you cannot be all over the place.
Awesome, man. I think that's a great example of the firefighter analogy. I think that actually brings together a lot of the concepts. Hadi, I was going to say, I love talking to you. I think I could spend the rest of the hour chatting about this and probably other topics. I appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on and sharing. So I can't thank you enough.
Thank you for having me, Amir.
Absolutely. I have 2 wrap-up questions for you before I let you go. One is, for a future guest, is there a question or topic you'd love to see answered by them?
I've been fascinated by Stoicism as a philosophy. And I'm writing an article about how I've used it at my company to help me grow the organization. So I would be interested to know, how would they think about philosophy and business? What's the intersection between philosophy, which is sometimes abstract, and business, which is sometimes practical?
That's where the art really kicks in. And secondly, how would you like, if somebody has a question for you or just wants to pick your brain on anything you mentioned on the podcast, what's a good way of getting a hold of you?
Yeah, so I'm very accessible on LinkedIn. You can find my email there. You can reach out with a direct message. I usually respond quite quickly. I also have started my own podcast called The First 100, where I interview entrepreneurs to learn how they acquired their first paying customers, because I'm very curious to keep on learning what others are doing. And that's one way, if you don't have a mentor, is to learn from what other people have done in the past. So they can reach me as well there. I'm on all platforms.
Awesome. Hadi, we'll make sure we link to the podcast and your LinkedIn. Again, thank you for being on the show. It was great chatting with you.
Thank you, Amir, and have a great day.
Awesome. That's it for this episode. Back again, different topic, different guests. Until then, 2 things. If anyone knows someone that can talk about that intersection of philosophy and business and some of that art that's involved in the process, love to talk to you. It is a good topic. And secondly, if the podcast is useful, you found it interesting, share it with someone you know. Give it a review on the platform of your choice. That's how the podcast has been growing, and I appreciate it. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.